Imagine standing outside your own front door, 7 months pregnant, in the middle of October rain, watching your mother-in-law wheel your suitcase onto the porch like you were a guest who had overstayed her welcome. My husband was upstairs. I could see his shadow through the bedroom curtain. He never came down. And the woman he chose over me was already inside, sitting in my kitchen, drinking from my cups. Nobody in that house knew who my brother was, but they were about to find out. If you've never heard this story before, that's because I never told it. Stay with me until the end, because the way this plays out, I promise you won't see it coming. And if this is your first time here, hit subscribe right now, because the stories on this channel go places most people are too afraid to tell. I want to start at the beginning, because that's the only fair place to start, not at the betrayal, at the beginning when everything still felt worth protecting. I met Victor at a dinner party on a Thursday evening in spring. He was confident without being loud, funny without trying too hard. He asked about my work before he asked anything else, and at the time, I thought that said everything about who he was. I was 31, careful with people, and I had walls, but Victor had this way of standing right at the edge of those walls and just waiting, patiently, until I let him in. We dated 2 years before he proposed. I had taken my time, watched how he treated people when no one important was looking, paid attention. Everything I saw told me this was safe. This was real. This was mine. His mother, Margaret, was charming in the early days. The kind of charming that feels like warmth, but is actually performance. His Aunt Doris echoed everything Margaret said, always 30 seconds behind, like she was waiting for permission to have an opinion. I noticed, but filed it away as harmless. My brother Raymond, he matters more than anyone else in this story. He's 8 years older than me, built his fortune in shipping and real estate starting from almost nothing. By the time I got married, he owned cargo vessels, commercial property firms, and had become the kind of man whose name made other businessmen straighten their posture. But I never talked about him. Not to Victor, not to Margaret. I didn't want to be seen as someone writing a powerful name. I wanted to be loved for exactly who I was. When I told Raymond I was engaged, he offered to look into Victor's background. I said no. He went quiet, then said, "Okay, but I'm always one phone call away." I told him I knew that. I wish I had let him look. The warning signs came slowly. Victor staying late more than seemed necessary. A name, Celeste, appearing in conversation once, twice, 3 times, always with a small pause before it. Then a hotel receipt in his jacket pocket, for a hotel 40 minutes from our home, on a night he said he was at a work dinner. I held that receipt for a long time. I sat on the edge of our bed and told myself there was an explanation. I was 7 months pregnant. I needed to stay calm. I would ask him calmly and he would explain, and it would be fine. It was not fine. I showed him the receipt that evening. I didn't accuse him. I placed it on the table and waited. He didn't lie for long. He told me it had been going on for 8 months. I was still counting backward in my head when he said Celeste's name out loud for the first time as something other than a passing reference, and he said it with a tenderness that told me everything. I didn't cry that night. I went very still and very cold, the way water goes still just before it freezes. Margaret called the next morning, not to comfort me, to manage the situation. She told me Victor was under pressure, that men made mistakes, that a good wife knows when to be flexible. And then she said, and I will never forget this, Celeste understands him in ways that are hard to explain. You're a good woman, but good isn't always enough. I hung up, sat in my kitchen, put my hand on my belly, and talked to my daughter. I told her we were going to be okay. The next 2 weeks were the cruelest of my life. Victor's family held a birthday dinner, and I wasn't invited. Celeste was. I found out through a photo on Doris's social page, a long table of people I had spent 4 years calling family, and there was Celeste in my chair, laughing at something Margaret said. Margaret was looking at her like she was the answer to a question she'd been asking for years. Then the divorce papers arrived by courier on a Tuesday afternoon. I was 7 months pregnant, standing in my doorway, holding an envelope that told me my marriage was over. 3 days later, Margaret and Doris came to the house and told me it was time to make arrangements for my departure. Those were her exact words. My departure. Victor stood near the window with his arms crossed and said absolutely nothing, while his mother told me to leave the home I had lived in for 4 years, the home where I had painted the nursery soft yellow because I wanted my daughter to open her eyes to warmth. They put my suitcase on the porch in the rain. Victor watched from the window and did not come down. My friend Helen was parked around the corner. She had a feeling, she told me later. She loaded my bag into her car and drove me to her house, and I sat in the passenger seat with my hand on my stomach and didn't speak for a long time. Then I said, "Call Raymond." She was already dialing. Raymond answered on the second ring. Helen told him what happened in under a minute. He asked where I was, asked if I was safe, and said, "I'll be there by morning." He was there in 6 hours. He knocked at Helen's door just before 4 in the morning, and when I opened it, he pulled me into a hug and held me without saying a word. I hadn't cried since the receipt, but something about Raymond showing up, without being asked, without needing an explanation, without making me feel like a burden, broke everything open. When I was done, we sat at Helen's kitchen table and he listened to the whole story without interrupting. And then he said, "I'm not here to fight anyone, Nadia. I'm here to make sure you never lose again." That was all. That was enough. Raymond didn't get where he is by being the loudest person in the room. He got there by being the most patient. Real power doesn't announce itself. It simply arranges things. Quietly, legally, completely. While I slept, Raymond was already making calls. His right-hand man, Gerald, began pulling records, property ownership, business filings, financial documents. What Gerald found in 48 hours changed everything. Victor's family logistics and warehousing company was in serious trouble. 3 outstanding loans, a revenue gap papered over for 2 years, and 1 critical supplier contract keeping their warehouse operations running, up for renewal in 6 weeks. That supplier was a subsidiary of one of Raymond's companies. Raymond read the report at Helen's kitchen table the next morning while I slept. Helen told me later he read the whole thing without changing his expression once. When he finished, he closed the folder, refilled his coffee, and said quietly, "All right, let's begin." Nothing that happened next was loud. No confrontations, no threats, no dramatic phone calls. Everything Raymond did was business, clean, legal, and absolutely devastating. A financial contact triggered a procedural audit of Victor's family company. Just a lender exercising a contractual right to review, clean on paper. But the numbers didn't hold up under scrutiny and panic set in immediately. The supplier contract was simply not renewed. A standard non-renewal notice, 30 days, professional language, no explanation required, none given. Raymond's lawyer made sure my divorce attorney understood every single thing I was legally entitled to. Not more than I deserved, but every single thing that was mine. The house, the joint savings, medical costs through birth and beyond. When Victor's lawyer received the full documentation package, he called Victor and told him contesting the divorce was not something he recommended. Victor signed the divorce agreement 11 days later. 11 days. Raymond also quietly purchased the building where Victor and Celeste were renting their apartment as a personal investment. He didn't change the lease. He didn't raise the rent. He simply became the landlord. The message didn't need to be spoken. I want to be clear. Revenge was never the point. Raymond's position was simply that if the people who had harmed me were standing on borrowed ground, the least he could do was make sure the borrowing stopped. That was the whole philosophy. My daughter came 5 weeks early. The doctor said stress-related. My body had been holding so much for so long that it simply decided it was time. Raymond was in the waiting room before I was fully checked in. Helen held my hand through the whole thing, talking steadily the entire time. Not about anything important, just enough to keep me anchored. My daughter arrived small and early, and the machines beeped in ways I didn't understand, and I searched every nurse's face for information. But she was strong. She announced herself to the world with a cry that filled the room completely, and I laughed and sobbed at the same time in a way I had never done before. I named her after my mother. Raymond came in after. This man who had spent 3 weeks quietly dismantling the financial stability of everyone who had thrown me out in the rain. He walked in. I put his niece in his arms, and he completely fell apart. Quietly, the way Raymond does everything. He turned slightly away, and when he turned back, he said, in the most unsteady voice I had ever heard from him, "She's going to be just fine. Look at her. She's already fine." Victor called the hospital that evening. Raymond answered my phone by accident. The line went completely silent for several seconds. Neither of them spoke. Then the call ended. That silence said more than an hour of conversation could have. The consequences arrived the way Raymond always moved, without drama, without announcement, with the quiet inevitability of a tide coming in. Within 60 days, Victor's family company lost 2 more vendors who, once word moved through the industry that the business was under financial review, decided the risk wasn't worth the relationship. The company folded within the quarter. Margaret had to sell her house to cover personal guarantees she had signed on the loans. Doris quietly disappeared from public life. Celeste left Victor 2 weeks after the money stopped. No dramatic scene. She simply wasn't there anymore. I wasn't surprised. I had seen how she looked at the lifestyle, never at the man. Victor ended up in a small rented room in a part of town he would have turned his nose up at a year before. He sent me a handwritten letter. No return address. It wasn't asking for anything. Not forgiveness, not a second chance. Just an acknowledgement. He said he knew what he had done. He was sorry, not in the way people say sorry when they want something, but in the way people say sorry when they've run out of excuses and are left alone with the truth of themselves. I read it once, put it in a drawer, went to check on my daughter sleeping in her yellow nursery. Raymond never spoke about what he had done, not once. Everything was legal, everything was documentable, and nothing could be traced to a single personal decision. Raymond had simply ensured that the natural consequences of Victor's family situation arrived on schedule rather than being indefinitely delayed. Over time, the town quietly figured out who my brother was. Margaret, I was told, went pale when she finally connected my last name to Raymond's name, to his company, to his buildings. She realized, too late, what she had put out in the rain. I wasn't there to see it. I didn't need to be. I live in the house now. My house. The yellow nursery, the big kitchen window that faces east, the morning light that lands on the floor at an angle my daughter has discovered she can chase like it's something alive. Raymond set up a trust for her without telling me. I found out through a letter from his lawyer 3 months after she was born. No explanation, no ceremony, just a document that said her future was taken care of. I cried for 20 minutes. I went back to my career as a property consultant. Raymond connected me with 2 colleagues who needed independent consultants. He opened a door and stepped aside. Everything I built from that point, I built myself. That mattered to me more than he probably knows. Helen is still my closest friend. Some people show you who they are when your life is falling apart, and you don't forget that. What that season cost me was real. The trust placed in the wrong person. The years spent in a house that was never as safe as I believed. The future I had planned so carefully, watched disassemble itself piece by piece. It wounded me in places that took a long time to reach, but it also gave me clarity I didn't have before. It gave me the understanding that real love, the kind that doesn't vanish when it's inconvenient, had been in my life the whole time. In a brother who drove through the night without being asked. In a friend who was parked around the corner because she had a feeling. I had spent so long trying to earn the love of people who were never going to give it. And the whole time, the people who would have moved the world for me were already there. That's the thing about surrounding yourself with the wrong people. It makes you forget the right ones exist. My daughter is almost 18 months now. She walks the way toddlers do, like every step is a conscious decision. She doesn't know any of this story. She doesn't know about the rain or the suitcase or the letter or the quiet dismantling of everything that tried to diminish her before she was even born. She just knows the yellow room, the morning light, and the faces that show up for her every single day without condition. She will grow up never knowing what was done for her before she could ask. And that is exactly as it should be, because that's what real protection looks like. It doesn't need an audience. It doesn't need credit. It simply makes sure the people it loves never stand in the rain again. If this story stayed with you, sit with that for a moment, because the real point was never about one family's fall or one man's power. It was about a woman who loved quietly, lost publicly, and was protected by people who never once made her feel like a burden. If you have a Raymond or a Helen in your life, hold on to them tighter than you think you need to. And if you're standing in your own rain right now, the right people are already on their way. You just haven't seen the headlights yet. Subscribe if this moved you. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. And the next story starts with a funeral, a forged will, and a family that forgot who they were dealing with. You won't want to miss it.